My name is Omar Al-Farouk. I am 42 years old, and until the afternoon of August 14th, 2025, I believe my life was governed by the steady rhythm of the Dallas heat and the predictable demands of my accounting firm. It was 104 degrees in Irving, Texas. I remember the exact shimmering quality of the asphalt in the parking lot of the masjid as I walked toward my car after prayer. I felt a strange, metallic tang in the back of my throat. Not the usual dry thirst of a Texas summer, but something sharper, like sucking on a copper coin. I reached for my door handle, and the world didn't just blur, it tilted 45 degrees to the left. My vision didn't go black immediately. Instead, it tunneled until all I could see was the chrome logo on my steering wheel through the window. Then came the pressure. It wasn't a clutching pain like you see in movies. It felt as though a massive, invisible hand had placed its palm on my sternum and decided to lean its entire body weight onto me. I tried to draw a breath, but my lungs felt like they had been filled with wet concrete. I remember the sound of my knees hitting the pavement. It was a dull, meaty thud that I felt more than I heard. A woman nearby, I think she was wearing a bright yellow hijab, dropped her groceries. I saw a carton of eggs shatter, the yolk spreading slowly toward my hand. I wanted to tell her not to worry about the mess, but the copper taste was now a full-blown roar of static in my ears. My forehead pressed against the hot gravel, and for a second, the searing heat of the ground was the only thing keeping me conscious. Then, the weight on my chest snapped into a sharp, agonizing electrical surge that radiated up my jaw and down my left arm. I felt my heart give one final, pathetic flutter, like a bird hitting a window pane. And then, the silence wasn't just in the parking lot. The silence was inside me. My internal clock, the one I had trusted for 42 years, simply stopped ticking. The transition wasn't a tunnel of light. It was a shift in perspective. One moment, I was tasting gravel and egg yolk, and the next, I was hovering near the acoustic ceiling tiles of Trauma Room 4. I saw myself. It is a deeply uncomfortable thing to see your own body from 8 feet above, looking like a discarded suit. I looked gray, a sickly, ashen color that didn't belong to a living man. I watched Dr. Sarah Jenkins. I read her badge, press her palms into my ribs. The sound was horrific from up there. I could hear the cartilage in my chest creaking and popping under the force of the compressions. A nurse was shoving a plastic tube down my throat, her movements frantic but practiced. "V-fib," someone shouted. "Charge to 200. I watched my body jerk off the table as the current surged through me. It looked violent, like I was being attacked rather than saved. What struck me most wasn't the fear, but the clinical detachment I felt. I noticed the small things, a coffee stain on the sleeve of the intern's white coat, the way the linoleum floor was scuffed near the trash bin, the rhythmic beeping of a monitor that was flatlining. I wasn't Omar the accountant anymore. I was a witness to a failing machine. I saw my wife, Layla, through the small rectangular window in the door. She wasn't screaming. She was leaning against the wall, her hands over her mouth, her eyes fixed on the floor. She was looking at my shoes, which someone had kicked into the corner. They looked so empty. That was the first time I felt a pang of something human, not for my life, but for the sheer loneliness of those shoes. I reached out, wanting to touch her shoulder, to tell her that the me on the table was just a shell, but my hand passed through the cold glass of the door like smoke. I realized then that the tether hadn't just frayed, it had been cut. I wasn't waiting for a heartbeat anymore. I was moving. The hospital room didn't disappear so much as it faded, like an old photograph left in the sun. The fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic dissolved into a vast, heavy stillness. I found myself standing in a place that wasn't a place. There was no horizon, no sky, just a soft, pervasive grayness that felt like the moment right before a massive thunderstorm breaks. It wasn't cold, but it was expectant. I turned around, expecting to see the gates of the paradise I had been taught about since childhood, or perhaps the scales of judgment. Instead, I saw a man. He wasn't glowing with an blinding radiance that hid his features. He was just there. He wore a simple, dark garment, and his feet were bare on the gray floor. He looked like someone who had walked a very long way. When he looked at me, I felt a physical sensation of being known. It wasn't just that he saw me. It was that he was aware of every secret thought, every lie I'd told myself, and every kindness I'd done in private. "Omar," he said. His voice didn't echo. It was grounded, resonant, and carried the weight of absolute authority. I knew instantly who he was, not because of a painting or a movie, but because my soul recognized its architect. I fell to my knees, not out of a directive, but because my legs simply couldn't support the sheer gravity of his presence. I tried to speak, to recite the Shahada, to say something that would justify my life, but my tongue felt heavy. "I am not here to weigh your ledgers today, Omar," he said, walking toward me. He stopped just a few feet away. His face was weathered, his eyes a deep, unsettling brown that seemed to hold the history of the world. "I have brought you here because the rhythm of the world you left is about to change. A shift is coming, one that starts in the middle of the month you call March. You must see what is being prepared, so you can understand why the heart of man must be either hardened or broken." The gray expanse around us didn't transform into a grand vision of the future. Instead, it became a series of windows into the mundane. Jesus, ISA, as I had always known him, didn't point with a theatrical gesture. He simply stood beside me, and the air rippled. Suddenly, I wasn't in the afterlife. I was standing in a suburban kitchen I didn't recognize, but the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. It was morning. A man was sitting at a glass table, staring at his phone. His breakfast sat untouched. On the screen, a news ticker was scrolling rapidly, mentioning supply chain adjustments and regional allocation protocols. It sounded like corporate jargon, but the man's hands were shaking. He looked at his wife, who was packing a lunch for their daughter. "They closed the accounts, Sarah," he whispered. "Not just ours. The whole branch. They said it's a stabilization window starting March 15th. The woman didn't cry. She just stopped moving, a piece of bread halfway to a lunchbox. The silence in that kitchen was more terrifying than any scream. I looked at Jesus, and his expression was one of profound sorrow. "This is the first event, Omar," he said. "The digital silence. It begins in the middle of March, not as a crash, but as a pause. Men have built their towers on numbers in the air, and when the air stays still, the towers vanish. It is not an act of God. It is the natural weight of greed finally snapping the spine of the system." I watched the woman in the kitchen finally drop the bread. She walked to the window and looked out at their quiet, manicured street. "What do we do?" she asked the empty air. I felt a cold shiver go through my non-physical chest. This wasn't a world-ending explosion. This was the quiet, terrifying realization that the floor had been pulled out from under a middle-class family. "The middle of March," Jesus repeated, "is when the trust breaks. When the bank app doesn't open, the heart of the father turns to ash." The scene shifted instantly. The kitchen was gone, replaced by the interior of a dimly lit restaurant, a place with white tablecloths and expensive wine. I saw a man I recognized from the news, a high-ranking official whose face was usually composed and arrogant. He was sitting across from a younger man in a sharp suit. "We can't delay the announcement past the 18th, the younger man said, his voice a frantic whisper. "The European markets are already depegging. If we don't move on the Internal Security Act by the weekend, we lose control of the narrative." The official took a slow sip of water. His eyes were darting toward the door. "It's not just the money anymore," he replied. "It's the movement. People are starting to gather without the platforms. They're talking in person. We didn't account for the physical proximity." Jesus moved closer to the table, though the men didn't see him. "This is the second event," he told me. "The frantic hiding. Watch how the shepherds of the world scramble when they realize the sheep no longer listen to the electronic whistle. In mid-March, a law will be drafted. Not passed yet, but drafted in the dark, that treats unauthorized assembly as a medical threat. They will use the memory of the old fear to justify a new cage." I felt a wave of personal nausea. I thought of my own office, my clients, my files. I thought of the internal security emails we all ignore as spam. Suddenly, I saw my own face on a screen in the background of the restaurant. It was an old LinkedIn profile or a tax record. It flickered and then turned red. My name was flagged. I felt a sudden, sharp disconnection from my own identity. My professional life, my degrees, my standing in the community, it was all being categorized as a liability by men who were terrified of losing their seats at a table that was already rotting. The third shift was the most painful because it was local. We were standing outside the masjid where I had collapsed, but it was months into the future. It was March. The weather was beautiful. That deceptive Texas spring where everything is green before the sun burns it away. I saw my younger brother, Yusuf. He was standing by the gate, arguing with our cousin, Ibrahim. They had been inseparable since childhood. They had started a landscaping business together. But now, Yusuf's face was contorted with a rage I had never seen. "You're going to get us shut down, Ibrahim," Yusuf shouted. "If you don't sign the digital compliance form, they won't renew our commercial license. I have 3 kids. I'm not losing the house because of your principles." Ibrahim looked at him with a tired, hollow expression. "It's not about the license, Yusuf. Look at what they're asking for. They want access to our private ledger. They want to see who we donate our zakat to. I won't do it." Yusuf spat on the ground, the same ground where I had tasted egg yolk and gravel. "Then you're out. I'm buying you out for pennies. Don't come to dinner on Friday." He turned his back and walked away, and I saw Ibrahim's shoulders slump. He looked older, smaller. "This is the 3rd event, and the one that breaks my heart the most," Jesus said, his voice dropping to a low, heavy tone. "The betrayal of the blood. In mid-March, the pressure from the first 2 events, the money and the law, will force a wedge into the family home. People will choose their comfort over their kin. They will sell their brothers for the ability to keep a bank account active for 1 more month." I reached out to Yusuf, wanting to scream at him, to tell him that Ibrahim was right, but my hand swept through the air like a ghost. I felt a crushing sense of isolation. This was the personal fracture. My family, the foundation of my entire world, was tearing itself apart over a piece of paper and a digital signature. The Dallas sidewalk dissolved, and I was back in the gray stillness, but this time the atmosphere was charged. It felt like the air before a lightning strike. Jesus stood before me, his presence no longer just sorrowful, but intensely focused. The directness of his gaze was a weight I could barely carry. "You see the fractures, Omar," he said, and his voice seemed to pull the very fabric of the gray space tight. "You wonder why the middle of March is the catalyst. You want to know what the 5 events are that will reshape the world you left behind. It is not a cosmic accident. It is the sifting." He stepped closer. "The first event is the digital Sabbath, the forced pause of the financial arteries. The second is the protocol of presence, the law that monitors where you stand and who you stand with. The third is the betrayal of the threshold, where the family unit breaks under the pressure of the first 2. These are the tools of a world trying to save itself through control. But the 4th event, which begins the transition into April, is the great unmasking. This is when the institutions you trust, the charities, the hospitals, the houses of worship, will be forced to declare their primary allegiance. They will either serve the system of the world or the truth of the Spirit. There will be no middle ground, no moderate path. You will walk into your masjid or your neighbor's church, and you will find a digital terminal where the pulpit used to be. I felt a cold sweat that shouldn't exist in this realm. "Why?" I whispered. "Why now?" "Because the illusion of independence has reached its limit," he replied. "The 5th event is the harvest of the aligned. By late spring, the world will be divided not by borders, but by frequency. Those who chose the security of the system will have it, but they will lose the ability to hear the whisper of the divine. Those who chose the struggle of the truth will lose their standing, but they will find a connection to the source that cannot be severed. This is what the warning is, Omar. The middle of March is the last exit ramp before the road becomes a high-walled canyon. What you choose in that moment determines the state of your soul for the era to come." As he spoke, a new vision forced its way into my mind. It wasn't a global landscape, but a single, terrifyingly mundane image, a smartphone screen. It was mine. I saw my thumb hovering over a blue button on an app one didn't recognize. The app was titled Universal Access and Health ID. Underneath the button, in fine print, were the words, "By clicking Accept, you agree to the real-time monitoring of all financial transactions and social associations to ensure community safety. Failure to sync will result in temporary suspension of utility services and grocery access." I saw my reflection in the dark glass of the phone. I looked exhausted. My bank balance was flashing in the corner, $1.14. Then, a text message popped up from my daughter, Amira. "Abba, they won't let me register for the final exams without the verified ID. Please, I worked so hard for this." The pressure in my chest from the heart attack was nothing compared to the crushing weight of that moment. I looked at Jesus. "This is the choice," I asked, my voice breaking. "A father's love against his soul? The system is designed to use your virtues, your love for your children, your desire to provide, as the very hook that pulls you in," Jesus said. His face was inches from mine now. The world will tell you that accepting is an act of love for your family. I tell you that accepting is the moment you hand over the keys to your temple. In mid-March, this choice will be presented as a temporary measure for a regional crisis. But there is nothing temporary about a seal. Once you trade your agency for access, the frequency of your spirit changes. You become a node in their machine, and my voice will become a distant static you can no longer decode. The vision of the phone expanded. Suddenly, I was standing in my own living room in Irving. It was late at night. The power was out, which was strange for our neighborhood. The only light came from the moon reflecting off the pool in the backyard. I saw myself, the living Omar, sitting on the sofa. I looked thinner. There was a stack of past due notices on the coffee table, all of them stamped with a red, non-compliant seal. The air conditioner was silent, and the house was sweltering, just like the day I died. There was a knock at the door. Not a loud, tactical team knock, but a polite, rhythmic tapping. I watched my living self open the door. It was a man in a polo shirt with a government logo on the pocket. He held a tablet. "Mr. Al-Farouk," the man said, his tone professional and entirely devoid of heat. "We noticed your household hasn't updated the March 15th stabilization credentials. We're here to offer a grace period. If you sync now, we can restore the grid to this address within 10 minutes. We'd hate for your family to suffer in this heat, especially with your medical history." The man looked past my living self toward the hallway, where my wife, Layla, was standing. She looked terrified. She wasn't looking at the man. She was looking at me, her eyes pleading for a solution, any solution. "This is the direct confrontation," the Jesus presence whispered in my ear. "It won't come with fire and brimstone. It will come with a polite man offering to turn the air conditioning back on. It will come with the promise of normalcy. But look at his eyes, Omar." I looked at the man at the door. His eyes were flat, not evil, but empty, like a screen that had been turned off. I realized then that he wasn't a person anymore. He was a function. He was the fourth event in the flesh, the unmasking. He was the face of a world that had traded its humanity for stability. The living version of me stood at the door, silhouetted against the moonlight, staring at the man with the tablet. I could feel his heartbeat, my heartbeat, thundering in his chest, a frantic, uneven rhythm that mirrored the one I'd had on the pavement in Irving. The man in the polo shirt didn't move. He didn't blink. He just waited with the practiced patience of an algorithm. "Just a signature, Mr. Al-Farouk," the man said. "For the children's sake. The schools won't accept the March 15th override without it. You don't want them falling behind, do you?" I looked at Jesus, who was standing beside me in my own living room. He wasn't looking at the man at the door. He was looking at me, the version of me currently in the gray space. "This is the moment of the great unmasking," Jesus said. "The fifth event. It is the harvest. The world asks for your signature, but it is actually asking for your resonance. If you sign, you are agreeing that your life, your breath, and your family belong to the system that provides the cooling air and the digital bread. You are telling the Creator that His providence is no longer enough. The middle of March is not a deadline of man. It is a boundary of the soul." I watched my living self reach for the stylus. My hand was shaking so violently that I nearly dropped it. I looked at Layla. She was weeping silently, her eyes fixed on our daughter's bedroom door. The heat in the house was stifling, a thick, wet blanket of Texas humidity. The choice felt impossible. It wasn't between good and evil. It was between survival and a terrifying, invisible freedom. "If I don't sign," my living self whispered, "we lose everything." "If you do sign," the Jesus presence replied, his voice echoing in the core of my being, "you lose the ability to want anything else. You will be full, Omar, but you will be hollow." The living Omar pulled his hand back from the tablet. He looked the man in the eye, really looked at him, and saw the void there. "No," he said. The word was small, but it felt like a mountain being moved. The moment he said it, the scene shattered. The living room, the man, the heat, it all dissolved into a white-hot flash of agony. I wasn't hovering anymore. I wasn't in the gray. I was being pulled through a narrow, crushing straw. Thump! My chest exploded. The copper taste returned, but this time it was mixed with the metallic sting of blood in my mouth. My eyes snapped open. The fluorescent lights of the ER were blinding. "We have a pulse," someone yelled. "Sinus rhythm. He's back." The pain was unimaginable. Every rib felt like it had been turned into jagged glass. I tried to gasp, but the tube in my throat blocked the air. I saw Dr. Jenkins leaning over me, her face drenched in sweat, her eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. She began to pull the tube out, a sickening sensation that made me heave. "Easy, mister. Al-Farouk, you're okay. You're at Baylor Scott and White. You're okay." But I wasn't okay. As the nurses moved around me, checking monitors and hanging 4 bags, I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was 4:18 p.m., August 14th. I looked at the heart rate monitor, the rhythmic green line that told the world I was alive. Then I looked at the nurse's workstation. A small television was mounted in the corner, tuned to a financial news network. The headline scrolling across the bottom read, "Federal Reserve announces new digital stability framework, pilot phase scheduled for mid-March." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination brought on by hypoxia. The dates were already being set in the world of the living while I was standing in the world of the dead. 6 months have passed since I died in that parking lot. I am sitting in my office now, the same office where I used to balance ledgers and worry about tax brackets. My chest still aches when the weather changes, a permanent reminder of the ribs they broke to bring me back. But the real pain is in the silence. Yesterday was March 14th. This morning, I woke up and tried to log into my business account to pay our mortgage. The screen didn't load. Instead, a blue window appeared, the same blue I saw in the vision. It asked for a verified compliance sync. I looked at my phone. I had 3 missed calls from Yusuf. I called him back, but his voice was different, flat, professional, distant. "Omar," he said, and I could hear the hum of a busy office behind him. "I'm sending you a link. You need to sign the digital waiver for the landscaping business. The city won't let us onto the municipal contracts without it. It's just a formality for the new March protocols." "I can't sign it, Yusuf," I said. My voice was steady, but my hand was gripping the edge of my desk so hard the wood was digging into my palm. "Don't be difficult," he snapped. "I have kids, Omar. We have a life. Just click accept so we can get the power back on at the shop. They cut the grid to the industrial park this morning for maintenance. We both know why." I hung up the phone. I walked to my window and looked out at the Dallas skyline. It looked exactly the same as it did a year ago, but the air felt thin, as if the oxygen was being slowly sucked out of the city. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the small, leather-bound notebook I've kept since the hospital. I turned to the last page. There, in the corner, was a small smudge of yellow, dried egg yolk from the parking lot that had somehow ended up on my sleeve and transferred to the paper. I looked at my bank app one last time. The balance was frozen. The accept button was glowing, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping at my office door. Not a loud knock. Just a polite, steady sound. I didn't answer. I just sat there in the quiet, watching the blue light of the screen illuminate the room, waiting for the heat to start. If this message felt important, it probably was. There are more stories like this, and they only get deeper. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next one, because some warnings aren't meant to be ignored.